Good evening, everyone. Good evening. How are you all doing? This is Danny Dhaiphong. Welcome back to the program. We have a jam-packed program tonight, so we are not going to waste any time. I just want to say good evening to all of the viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do hit the like button as you come into the show. That helps boost this stream in the YouTube algorithm. I also want to thank all of the moderators who are here tonight. Okay. Let's see, who do we got? We have Quantum Alchemist. We have Desert Mantis. Thank you so much thus far. I also want to thank all of the Patreon subscribers, all of the Substack subscribers who may be in the audience, all of the YouTube members who may be in the audience. You can subscribe in those places, support this channel. YouTube does not like the topic we are going to talk about tonight when it comes to Israel and Hezbollah. I am going to just put it out there that this video very well could be demonetized. So you do want to subscribe, become a member in order to fight that kind of censorship. All of those links are in the video description. You can also bet that I've already experienced this censorship. I will show later. Facebook took down my promotion post saying that I was trying to essentially get people to do something. They say cybersecurity was trying to get people to do something that they didn't want to do. I guess watch this stream. So I had that post was taken down. I'm going to show you what that looks like later in the program. So this is not a topic that YouTube, that Google, that Facebook, or that nobody in the corporate monopoly information sphere likes this topic. So just FYI, do hit that like button, do hit the subscribe button, do hit that notifications bell, and also subscribe to the show if you are able to in all the various ways. But we are going to get started. So what we have on deck tonight, I'm going to give a coverage of, I was trying to get someone who's been covering the resistance maybe a bit more deeper than me, but I was not able to secure anyone. I do have Hadi Francis, I think, on this coming Friday, August 2nd, based out of Lebanon, a Lebanese journalist. She's been great on so many other programs, so she will hopefully be joining. I'm still confirming that. But for now, I'm going to I needed to cover this because I do believe this is urgent. I do believe war could very well be imminent. Some Israeli media sources are saying within 48 hours, you have Netanyahu gathering, or some people don't say Netanyahu, gathering the cabinet, the Israeli cabinet, to even further. They're already bombing Lebanon right now. They are bombing Lebanon. I'm going to show you all of this after this pretext, which is a very, very suspect and suspicious pretext. Okay, a very suspicious pretext in the Golan Heights, Syrian Golan Heights town of Majdal Shamis. Okay, so we're going to talk about that first. Then we're going to get into Ukraine. And then if we have time, I will do an update on China. Okay, but we have to get to this first. So let us get started. Please hit the like button as you come in. And we are going to roll now into this very, very important story and a very dangerous moment that we find ourselves in. This is not just a news story to report on. This is the development, a geopolitical development that very well could lead to a bigger war. So let us get started. On July 27th, there was a missile strike on a football field in the Syrian Golan Heights town of Majdal Shamis. And immediately, Israel sounded the alarm, stating that Hezbollah was responsible. There was over a dozen people killed, many more injured, and the initial reports indicated that, in fact, it was Israelis who were killed. But remember, I just said that this is the Syrian Golan Heights. But if you know anything about the region, you know that Israel actually occupies the Golan Heights in Syria, and it has done so since the end, or since the beginning to the end, and now up until the present of that 1967 war, which has drawn all of these controversial borders that Israel now rests. So I'm going to pull up The Cradle, a great source of information on all things West Asia. But The Cradle reported on a full-scale war with Lebanon is near, says Israel's foreign minister, after blaming the 12 young people who were killed this attack on Hezbollah. Now, what is so interesting about this is that it was so obvious that Israel was jumping on this based on just the rapid nature of the response. And I'm going to get into exactly what Israel has been doing since then. But first, let's read this report. It says Israel's foreign minister, Israel Katz, said on July 28th, a full-scale war with Lebanon and Hezbollah is near following a mysterious missile strike on a soccer field in the town of Majd al-Shamis in the Israeli-occupied Syrian Golan Heights on the 27th of July. We're approaching the moment of full-scale war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, said Katz. The Israeli military said on Sunday morning, July 28th, that it had conducted overnight strikes in various locations in Lebanon, including Borj al-Shamali in the Tyre district and areas in the Bekaa Valley, allegedly in response to Saturday's bombing in the town of Majd al-Shams. The Israeli strikes appeared to stop short, said the New York Times, of a major escalation, but strong expectations on July 28th morning was that Israel might still mount a bigger response. And here's what the foreign ministry's Mr. Katz had to say. We will pay a price both on both the front and the home front. But by the end of the war, Nasrallah and Hezbollah will be crushed and Lebanon will suffer severely. We will restore peace and security in the northern communities. I've instructed the foreign ministry to prepare a comprehensive campaign worldwide to gain legitimacy for action in Lebanon. So that's the move toward war after this incident. In a statement, Hezbollah vehemently denied any involvement in the Majd al-Shams bombing. The Israeli army rejected the statement, insisting Hezbollah was behind the strike. Israeli army spokesperson Daniel Hagari claimed Sunday morning the rocket, which was fired at Majd al-Shams, was a Falak 1 rocket of Iranian production whose warhead carried over 50 kilos of explosives. But eyewitnesses at the scene reported it was Iron Dome interceptor missile that fell on the field, according to an Al Arabi TV correspondent who spoke with a member of the Israeli ambulance service, the Red Star of David. Okay, and we can play that. No translation, but a member of the Israeli EMS wearing the Red Star of David shirt informed me that he heard witnesses say, who are present, that it was an Iron Dome missile, but he doesn't dare come out and record the statement. He said he would be put in jail. Remember, this territory is under occupation. Okay, and then a political researcher and military expert, Dr. Hassan Ahmed Hassan, stressed that Hezbollah and the rest of the resistance factions have nothing to do with what happened at Majd al-Shams, and the Israeli authorities must provide explanation that convinces the minds instead of raising the ceiling of threats and intimidation. Okay, and we're going to get into a lot of the various reasons why this might be very suspect. So that's the initial report. Okay, now I want to just show you some of the fallout. So first, we can just take a look at initial breaking reports on what happened, right? Initially, they said that it was Hezbollah's missiles, right? That was the initial report. Here's a photo of what occurred. It's hard to see. There's crossed out there, but there are other photos that show that it's a little bit suspect what happened because there's no crater. And most people who have been following what Hezbollah does in terms of its own rocket fire is that they won't just fire one rocket, they'll fire multiple rockets because they're actually trying to penetrate that Iron Dome that is so impenetrable. And thus, there will be multiple rocket strikes, not just one. And it's unlikely that there would be just one very craterless impact on the surface here. But I'm not an expert on those things. But what I am understanding here is that it would be incredibly foolish of Hezbollah to hit the Syrian Golan Heights. Okay, so in this march to war, and there is a march to war happening right now, and you know it is serious when you have, when you have the Middle East Airlines, which is a Lebanese airline that flies out of Beirut, say that amid this heightened tension, they are announcing that some flights originally due to land in Beirut on July 28th will now land the next day. Other airlines are reportedly considering temporary alteration of their flight plans as well. And this is from the State Department, that if you're traveling to or from Lebanon, to monitor that status. So there's going to be a lot of hesitations of flying in and out of Lebanon because of Israel's rhetoric. Now, we have to ask ourselves first, what happened here? Well, you could say that it was just Hezbollah. You could just take Israel's word for it, that Hezbollah did it, right? You could take Hagari's words, you could take Israel Katz's words, but that would just belie so many facts. First of all, we can just look at the video, and I'm not going to play the sound of the video, but we can look at the video of what happened that day, okay? So here is the missile. I'm going to turn it on mute because I am not it's sirens, you'll hear explosions, but this is all you see. What you're going to see here is the Iron Dome malfunctioning on that very same day. And this is the area of the Golan Heights where it malfunctioned. This person was, and now you're going to see that missile here just malfunction and land and explode in that area. So essentially, that's not what it was supposed to do. Okay. You see how actually there are multiple missiles here that are malfunctioning. There you see explosions. That was the Iron Dome malfunctioning. And this is not the first time this has happened either. Okay. There was a malfunction back in the spring of 2024. I'm going to show that now in the very same location. Okay. In the very same location, there was a malfunction. Let me put it up here. Here is that malfunction. Put it on full screen or the volume. But I'll show you. This is footage of the Iron Dome. As you can see, the missiles are just, they're just everywhere. It's malfunctioning. It is hitting. This is the exact same region, right? You can almost tell just by the terrain that this is the exact same region in the Golan Heights. And don't just take my word for it, and don't just take video word for it. Take the Druze community inside of the Syrian Golan Heights. This is probably the most important point here on why we should be suspicious. Who are the Syrian Druze? Well, the vast majority of Syrian Druze are Arabs. They are Arab first. They are very, very, very devoutly nationalist, very pro-Syria, and they are not Israelis. Actually, the Druze, since 1967, since during that war, they took up arms. They fought and opposed the occupation. They did not succeed because the Golan Heights is occupied, but they never accepted Israeli citizenship. So it's not just me who's saying this, but the Druze Initiative in the Golan Heights has also said this, okay? So here's the Middle East Observer saying that Galeb Saif, head of the Druze Initiative, said the missiles that fall on the Druze villages in the Golan Heights in Galilee are Israeli interceptor missiles, and they always cause great damage to places and lives. We see every day Iron Dome missiles miss their targets and fall on us. Every day is what they're saying. We just get this report because Israel wants to use us as a pretext for war. So, I mean, we can go on and on and on here. And we can see even now the intense, just absolute disdain that the Druze people, Syrians, have for Israel. This is the Cradle again, reporting from the Golan Heights. You murderer, get out of here. Syrian Druze residents in the town of Majd al-Shamis in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights expel Israeli finance minister and other members of Netanyahu's Likud party from the funeral of the 12 young people killed after the missile fell on a soccer field. The Israeli media and army have described the victims as Israeli civilians, but the residents of Majd al-Shams are Syrian Druze living under occupation in the Golan Heights. Residents of the town refuse Israeli citizenship and continue to view them as Syrians. So the finance minister is Smotrich. He is a you see them confront him. These are Syrians confronting him. I'm coming. If they can arrest me, I'm going in. Smotrich, get out of here, you son of a... We don't want you here. You murderer, get out of here. You filth, get out of here. We don't want you here. You should not be here at all. You shouldn't have come here at all. So, I mean, suffice it to say, the Druze are not a big fan of Israel. They are not a big fan of the occupation. They oppose the occupation. Actually, the Druze are a big fan of the Syrian government. Here you see Dan Cohen, great journalist, says this is Majd al-Shamis, Israeli occupied Syria. It makes zero sense for Hezbollah to attack people who are such a close ally. Israel wants war in Lebanon, needs a pretext, so blaming Hezbollah for the strike without presenting any evidence, don't take the bait. And there you see the Druze with their Syrian flags. And actually, you know, this understates it. Every time there are rallies in the Golan Heights for the government, it is led by the Druze community inside of the Golan Heights. So that is those are just the facts. Okay, those are just the facts. Now, I want to also just pinpoint that Hezbollah does not need to commit such an attack on Israel. Why would Hezbollah fire into the Golan Heights at this very moment when it has successfully collected a massive amount of intelligence via its drones, its incredible drone technology? We've seen this. Why would Hezbollah need to strike in the Golan Heights after successfully, right, over and over and over again, hitting Israeli military targets throughout this conflict? We have seen over and over and over again Hezbollah be able to strike military targets, whether it is in the Golan Heights, whether it's in any Israeli occupied territory. Hezbollah has been able to hit it. I've shown the photo of all of just massive amounts of so-called northern Israel over the Lebanese border burning because they have hit just a massive amount of Israeli territory in order to show the Israelis that they aren't messing around. Why would they need to fire one shot at a football field? You could say, oh, well, they made a mistake, Danny. They made a mistake. Well, then why wouldn't Hezbollah embrace this mistake? Because Hezbollah has a record. Here's the Human Rights Watch, okay? Not a friend of Hezbollah. But Human Rights Watch wrote this, okay? Assessment of wartime statements from Hezbollah during the 2006 conflict, okay? What we are leading into again. And what Hezbollah said, all right, what Hassan Nasrallah said in 2006, when on July 19th, a Hezbollah rocket killed 2 elderly Palestinian people in Israel. This was Okay, sorry. When a rocket killed 2 Palestinian Israeli boys in Nazareth. So there were a few accidents here. Hezbollah did not intend to specify their intended targets, but they did apologize. Okay, right. So when it hit civilians and then expressed regret for having done so, literally saying that they admitted it. They expressed regret for having done so. And I can show the tweet of Hassan Nasrallah, the video of Hassan Nasrallah, literally, right? In 2006, when Hezbollah rockets fell on an Arab town in the Palestinian territories and killed 2 Palestinians, at the time, Hezbollah did not deny responsibility, but rather confirmed it and apologized for the unintended mistake. Okay, so he literally did this. This is Hassan Nasrallah. This is the current leader of Hezbollah now. So it is very suspicious. It is very suspect on why Hezbollah would need to do this. And we don't have to doubt that Israel lies, okay? Israel has been lying since the beginning of its genocidal onslaught in Gaza. Look at this. This is just the first 5 weeks. 50 Israeli lies in 5 weeks. I won't even read them because this will get taken off. But I can list some of them, okay? if there's 50 lives, I could just name some off the top of my head. How about all of the so-called hostages that were raped and maimed and beheaded? We find out that a lot of those have actually been released, and many of them at the beginning, especially in the first transfer of hostages, said that they were treated well. How about the events on October 7th when we were told that Hamas killed all of the 1,200 to 1,400, right? They had to reduce the number a few times. All of the 1,200 Israelis that were killed, it was all by Hamas. Well, what did we find out? Actually, the Hannibal Directive, Israeli policy, which says is the Israeli military has the permission to kill everyone in a hostage situation if they feel like they cannot get those hostages back in that moment. Well, we find out that they did employ the Hannibal Directive, and the Hannibal Directive likely killed most of those who were in the crossfire between Hamas and Israel. So I can go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. The weapons under the hospital, the tunnels under Al Shifa. I mean, just in this conflict alone, let alone this entire decades and decades and decades long of occupation, okay? This decades long occupation, which always leads to not just a war with the Palestinians and with Gaza and with the Palestinian people, but everyone. They're bombing targets in Lebanon at the moment, right? So they struck a series of so-called Hezbollah terror targets overnight deep inside of Lebanese territory, including weapons and terrorist infrastructure in areas of Chabrina, Borj al-Chamali, Becca, Kafal, we can go on and on and on. Tyre Hafa. They're bombing Lebanon now. They're preparing for a broader war, though, supposedly. But I have a thesis on this. I don't believe that Israel is prepared for this broader war. Not only do I not believe that they're prepared for this broader war, but I truly do believe that Israel is not only not prepared, but I don't believe that even if they are serious, that they believe that they can defeat Hamas. Okay, I don't believe they can. I mean, it wasn't long ago. It was just this month that we heard reports of Israel running out of tanks and ammunition. Why? Because they are tied up in Gaza. Israeli army running out of ammunition and tanks amid the ongoing war in Gaza. They said its tanks are damaged and out of service, and it admitted to a shortage of ammunition amid the war in Gaza and clashes in Lebanon. So they haven't even expanded the war, and they are running out of ammunition, and they are running out of weapons. They're running out of tanks. The Israeli army is reportedly running out of tanks and ammunition as it continues to wage its deadly onslaught in Gaza for a ninth straight month. In filings submitted to the country's Supreme Court, the military reportedly said that a significant number of tanks have been damaged and are completely out of service amid its Gaza offensive, but did not reveal the exact number. The admission was made in response to a formal petition demanding the inclusion of female soldiers in Israel's armored corps. So that program has been delayed until 2025 because they don't have enough tanks. They do have a lot of U.S. aid. They do have a lot of U.S. military aid, but obviously it's not enough to expand the front. So what are they going to do against Hezbollah? Not only this, okay, but it's not just Hezbollah. I have talked about how the axis of resistance, okay, the axis of resistance is multifaceted. It consists of so many different groups that if they wage a war on Hezbollah in Lebanon, that they are going to be fighting the rest of the axis of resistance. And Hezbollah already has the capacity to rain 1,000 missiles down on Tel Aviv in less than 2 days. Israeli military officials are admitting that if they start a war with Hezbollah, there could be hell to pay for it in just a single day. Just a single day. But it's not even just Hezbollah. It's the fact that this attack comes, right? This pretext comes in the context of what already is a failure, a lost war with the axis of resistance. Israel believes that it can salvage Netanyahu's political career, the political career of all of these just absolutely illegitimate occupiers that are continuing to commit genocide in Gaza, that a regional war will make it look like that Israel is under threat, and that means that Israel has the right to do whatever it wants, likely including using nuclear weapons. Hence, why the axis of resistance is very much strategic about their actions and about how they move against Israel. But I want to show you that it's not just the axis of resistance. The axis of resistance, I mean, it's not just Hezbollah. We just witnessed right before this attack the Ansar Allah movement in Yemen, really the legitimate leadership, government and political leadership in Yemen. We saw them penetrate the Iron Dome. They were flying a drone, the Yafa drone, named after what Tel Aviv was called, what was called before the Israeli occupation of Palestine. The IAF, the Israeli Air Force, tracked the drone that hit Tel Aviv for 6 minutes but failed to classify it as a threat. They said, so not only is there Iron Dome errors, but Ansar Allah launched a drone from Yemen that exploded in Tel Aviv. This is back in mid-July, and it was in the air for 6 minutes, and they were supposedly tracking it for 6 minutes. Yet it penetrated a hit, and it did kill a former Israeli soldier who was still working for the Israeli government. So the Israeli Defense Forces said the unnamed aerial vehicle has been identified, but human error led it to not being engaged by air defenses, as no action was taken against the identified target, later confirmed to be a long-range drone attack. No warning sirens sounded. So the drone was supposedly Iranian-made Samad 3 that had been modified for extended range, had flown more than 10 hours to reach Israel. So Yemen can hit Israel, and that's what they wanted to show. But of course we know, and Israel likes to brag, and the United States even brags about this, we know that Iran also has the capabilities, but they like to underestimate Iran, but not Chatham House, not the U.S. government-funded think tank, which said that Iran's attack on Israel, this is back in April of 2024, Operation True Promise, was not the failure many claim, but it has ended Israel's isolation. So they're saying it galvanized allies, etc. But, okay, this is what they admit. They say, okay, that they have established. So when judged solely by a strategic goal, this is Operation True Promise, to bolster Iranian deterrence and attempt to rewrite the rules of engagement with Israel, Iran's attack was largely successful. Iran showcased more capability in its attack than detractors would like to admit. Iran forced Israel and the U.S. to spend more than $1 billion to counter the attack. That's not an insignificant outcome, considering that Iran paid roughly 1/10 that amount to attack. In a fiscally constrained and politically charged environment, Washington increased U.S. military assistance to Israel is not guaranteed. Okay? So that's the Chatham House admitting that Iran's Operation True Promise was more impressive than what we are led to believe. And then, of course, there's the fact that the resistance has made headway in isolating Israel economically, including the Ansar Allah blockade of the Red Sea, which has led to the Eilat port in Israel going bankrupt. After 85% of operations in the Red Sea have been terminated, thereby leaving one of the most important ports for Israel's economy essentially bankrupt and eliminating it's a huge part of its economy. And that is what you call the resistance being very much ready to step up to the plate. So we don't have exact confirmation that it was an Iron Dome missile. We don't have that exact confirmation. But what we do have is confirmation that the Israeli narrative is absolutely worthless, right? We have confirmation of that from all of the lies we have been told since October 7th, and from the fact that Hezbollah has absolutely no interest in hitting the Golan Heights. Syria is an ally in the resistance. There's an Islamic resistance in Syria that is wreaking havoc on Israel right now. And the Syrian government is an ally of Hezbollah. Syrian government, Bashar al-Assad, they're allies of Hezbollah. Why would then Hezbollah hit the Druze people who are Syrians and who support the government of Syria and who are against the occupation that Israel is imposing upon them? It makes absolutely no sense. And if it were an accident, I've already showed that Hassan Nasrallah would have admitted it. Why wouldn't Hassan Nasrallah, why wouldn't Hezbollah admit it? It's insulting because it's Hezbollah, it's the resistance that can't really afford to make these mistakes because they're the ones who are waging a resistance war. Israel is waging an offensive war. Israel has every interest in a pretext. Every interest in a pretext. Why? Because one, they do not have legitimacy worldwide. They don't have it in the region. They don't have it anywhere anymore. The United States doesn't want to see a regional war right now. The United States is not in a good position politically, economically, militarily. Israel wants to drag the United States into aiding their reckless war on Hezbollah. In the United States, I almost said Israel, even though they're very wedded to the hip, they are having a very conflicting moment. The United States, on the one hand, is urging Israel to exercise restraint. On the other hand, saying that they support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah. So we can't trust the United States' response, but what we do know is the United States is not all in on this. And Israel wants to pull them into this. They wanted to do it with Iran. When Israel, why did Iran conduct Operation True Promise? It wasn't offensive. It was in response to the murder of their top IRGC generals in the embassy, Iranian embassy in Syria. See a pattern here? Seems like Israel really likes to use Syria, which it just so happens to occupy a portion of, as a building block toward a broader war. And that's what this is. That's why they are talking about war being imminent. That's why they are talking about war being just 48 hours away as of Saturday, July 27th, Sunday, July 28th. Now, whether that occurs or not is one thing. But here we're going back to how Israel is talking about this. That's why this is so serious. Because, yes, Israel in a lot of ways is all talk. But they are committing a genocide right now. And they are in open conflict with Hezbollah. So Eli Cohen said that Lebanon should burn. The Israeli media and army have described victims as Israeli civilians, okay, but they're actually Druze. So these are high-level people talking about Lebanon needs to burn. And if you saw anything in social media, okay, anything on social media, on X from Zionists, you saw that indeed that is what they want. So this is the situation that we're in. We are in a situation where, on the one hand, Israel is moving toward an unthinkable war that, in fact, I'm a friend of the show, Richard Medhurst, heard many say this, and I say this a lot too. Well, if Israel is going to keep talking, it's been months and months and months. They've been looking for pretexts. They've been almost thirsty for a war with Hezbollah, almost wanting them to test out their full capacity. Well, why don't you just go do it? On the other hand, the Axis of Resistance has been doing everything they can to prevent that because they know that Israel is the least trustworthy kind of adversary that you could have in such a scenario. That Israel has been very non-transparent about its nuclear capacity. Israel has been non-transparent about how it conducts war. Israel has been the most brutal regime when it comes to conducting warfare, when it comes to conducting whatever, if you want to even call it warfare, really, when it comes to administering and tightening its grip on its occupation, right? They know, and we know, that they can't be trusted. They can't be trusted to follow the laws of war. They can't be trusted to follow international law. They spit on it. They trample on it. They don't care about it. They really don't care about international law because, as I said, the Golan Heights are not just Syrian because Syrians say so and the Druze Syrians say so. It's Syrian because the United Nations says so. Resolution 497, 1981. Here it is. Having considered the letter from the permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic contained in document S 14791, reaffirming that the acquisition of territory by force is inadmissible in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, the principles of international law, and relevant Security Council resolutions. It's decided that the Israeli decision to impose its laws and jurisdictions and administrations in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights is null and void without, and let me just zoom this in, null and void without international legal effect, demands that Israel, the occupying power, should rescind its decisions. Null and void. All right. Let me just zoom that in even more so you get the picture here. Null and void. The United Nations, the international community, the entirety of the world, essentially, other than maybe the United States, does not recognize Israel's right to rule over this territory, yet they are claiming to be sympathetic about the Druze Syrians. Despite the fact that they are imposing upon them a brutal occupation that was established from a brutal war. Hundreds of thousands of Druze, of Syrians in general, displaced from the Golan Heights. And the Iron Dome continues to rain misfired interceptors on their heads. Who are you going to believe? I'm going to tell you one thing, though. This is desperate. This shows that Israel has not only no legitimacy toward a broader war with Lebanon and Hezbollah, but that it won't win that war. And it won't win in general because the Axis of Resistance has demonstrated it has the capacity to respond in a big way. And I don't believe, and I think the evidence shows that Israel is actually in big trouble when it comes to this war. So that is what we know so far. We are on the precipice of a broader war between Hezbollah and Israel. And if that war should occur, Israel will not be able to survive it. So, in effect, you could say this segment is a warning to Israel itself. Because if Israel truly wants to survive, if it wants to live on longer than its genocidal onslaught in Gaza, a war with Hezbollah would probably be the last thing that will work out for it. So that's just the facts. It's the last thing that will work in its favor is a war with Hezbollah. All right, everybody, let us get to the next story, okay? We're going to do some Ukraine, okay? Here we go. Stick around, keep hitting that like button, keep hitting that subscribe button, keep hitting that notifications bell. All right, subscribe to the channel if you are new here. And of course, become a member if you have not done so already, because that helps support this show. We're going to get into another situation that is actually very dire itself. Not a lot of people are talking about it as fervently as before, but nonetheless, it is a situation that could very well spiral out of control. So here we go. Vladimir Putin has issued what is the sternest and starkest warning yet to the United States and to Germany as well for its promises in 2026 to essentially transfer the US's long-range missile capacity to German territory, which would leave Russian military installations, territory, etc., very much exposed to not just German firepower, but US supplied German firepower, returning the world to a Cold War nuclear scenario, not just any scenario, but a nuclear scenario. So, this is what Vladimir Putin had to say. He said that there's going to be a reciprocal response from Russia should the United States actually go through with its plans in 2026 to do this, accusing the West of clinging to a Cold War mentality. Russia will consider itself free from a moratorium on the deployment of medium and shorter range missiles if the U.S. places missiles in Germany, Russian President Vladimir Putin said in an address to sailors at the Navy Day Parade in St. Petersburg. Earlier this month, the U.S. and Germany announced plans to deploy long-range precision missiles in Europe. According to the U.S.-German press release on July 10th, the U.S. will begin episodic deployments of long-range fire capabilities of its multi-domain task force in Germany in 2026. Putin says this is noteworthy, as such deployment will put important Russian state and military facilities, administrative industrial centers, as well as defense infrastructure within reach of these weapons. He noted that the flight time of such missiles to targets on Russian territory would be about 10 minutes, and they could also be equipped with nuclear weapons. This situation is reminiscent of events in the Cold War related to the deployment of American medium-range missiles in Europe, Putin stated. He said that while Russia has left long ago the Cold War, the U.S. has not reciprocated. He warned that if the U.S. goes through with missile deployment plans, Russia will respond accordingly. If the U.S. implements such plans, we will consider ourselves free from a previously adopted moratorium on the deployment of medium and short-range strike weapons, and will take steps to boost the capabilities of coastal troops in our Navy. And this is the big one. We will take measures to deploy these systems, taking into account the actions of U.S. and its satellites in Europe and other regions of the world. That is a promise that we will be in a Cuban Missile Crisis situation again. It's not just that Russia will begin to establish deterrence capabilities within Russian territory. Russia will take mirror moves that will establish a similar kind of arrangement where the U.S., where Germany will now be within very much close range of Russian firepower. So that is where this is all taking us. That is the nuclear situation that this could very much transpire into, because these missiles can be armed with warheads, with nuclear weapons. So this is the situation. You might ask yourself, well, why would the United States consider this now? Because the situation is not good for Ukraine in any respect when it comes to this conflict. In fact, there is an almost schizophrenic, should I say, or just absolutely contradictory narrative being spun in the Western media about the conflict in Ukraine. So on the one hand, you have here the Washington Post, okay, saying that Russia's adapting tactics, advances in Donetsk, and takes more Ukrainian land, with a new offensive focus coming as Ukraine faces depleted forces, sweltering heat, and turmoil in a potentially consequential election. So this was on July 27th. Russian forces have mounted an arc of attack in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, pushing through intense summer heat in a bid to extend Moscow's steady territorial gains and capture the city of Pokrovsk, a key transit junction. The offensive is underway as Ukraine continues to suffer from a shortage of soldiers, election turmoil in the United States, which is setting off new speculation Kiev may be forced to negotiate a surrender of lands. An influx of American weapons and money helped Ukraine blunt a renewed invasion of the northeast Kharkov region in May, preventing a major breakthrough and dashing Moscow's hopes of surrounding Ukraine's second largest city. Russian commanders have refocused their attention on the Donetsk region, perhaps Russian President Vladimir Putin's top territorial goal. The reinvasion of Kharkov region, while yielding limited gains, nevertheless diverted Ukrainian resources. A battalion commander named Alexander, fighting near it, said that Ukrainian forces are struggling and that Putin's prize increasingly seems within reach. Strategy is clever. You try to concentrate strength of your enemy in one direction and then distract them at another. Whose call sign is Genius, Alexander, I guess, and who is being identified only by first name in keeping with Ukrainian military protocol. The first objective is to destroy us. The second is to push us so they can get more leverage for peace talks and get more from us. They're almost at the point of capturing the Donetsk region. So that sounds pretty bad. I don't think there's anything else we can say about that. But as the Western media is sounding the alarm about Ukraine's chances, which are nil, they're zero. Ukraine has lost. It is over, right? Essentially any prospect for Ukrainian victory or even Ukrainian survival when it comes to they can keep fighting and fighting and fighting, and it might last a while, but they are going to be the ones that burn out. Here you have now The Guardian, okay? The Guardian just interviewed Alexander Syrskyi, the new Ukrainian general, who says, and this is what's so interesting about this headline: I know we will win. Ukraine's top general on turning the tables against Russia. And how, he says. But he didn't say that. You can't find this. The quote is only in the headline. They made that quote up. I mean, maybe he said it. Perhaps he did, but they didn't include it in the rest of the article. So the top general, Alexander Syrskyi, weighs Ukraine's recent setbacks and the counterstrikes in the changing face of Europe's biggest war since 1945. So here you have, okay, a lot of this is a puff piece for Syrskyi, but I'm going to get to the points, okay? They're summarizing Russia has more of everything: tanks, infantry, fighting vehicles, soldiers. The original 100,000 strong invasion force has grown to 520,000, said Syrskyi, with a goal of 690,000 men in 2024. Ukrainian figures are not made public, but he said, the top general of Ukraine, a ratio of 1-2 or 1-3 in favor of equipment for Russia. Then you have, okay, some of the more specific numbers. Russian tanks have doubled, 1,700 to 3,500. Artillery systems almost tripled. I mean, armored personnel carriers have gone up, doubled almost. Artillery systems have tripled. The enemy has a significant advantage in force resources. The issue of supply, the issue of quality is at the forefront. Okay. So that's the admission. So you think, okay, well, things are going pretty badly. So this article could not possibly be about how they will win, but it is, surprisingly enough. Okay. And I want to just fast forward now to here we go, right? Recent setbacks in context. Russia's creeping victories are tactical ones, only local gains rather than operational breakthroughs, such as the captures of a major city. In principle, the enemy has not made any significant progress on the front line. Active hostilities were taking place across 977 kilometers of it, twice the length of the border between Germany and France. So, again, this narrative, Ukraine is surviving. Ukraine has not been pushed all the way back. Huge cities, even though Avdiivka is a pretty big one, but huge cities have not been taken, right? Kiev is still standing. The problem is that this was never Russia's point. Russia is not here to take all of Ukraine. It's not here to just push through the front lines and destroy all of Ukraine. That's the narrative they're trying to promote. So you can think that Ukraine has a chance. But in fact, what they're trying to sell is Russia's strategy as somehow emblematic of Ukraine's fortitude. Not to say that Ukraine, of course, isn't putting up fights on the front line. They're dying in massive numbers. But it is to say that this is Russia's strategy. They want to drain everything from Ukraine in a very slow and deliberate manner. That gives Russia the ability to remain stable. It gives it the ability to run an economy, to be a global power that it is rising to be. It gives it the ability to fight this conflict and get on with other matters at the same time, because you're not going to win this war NATO's way, and that's what Russia has learned. Okay? So, Syrskyi contrasted his battlefield tactics with those of Russian commanders. It's very important for us to save the lives of our soldiers. We don't defend ruins to the death. He said he's not willing to achieve goal at any cost or chuck his men into futile meat assaults, which, mind you, is a complete lie, because that's all Ukraine has been doing, with nearly 1,000 Ukrainian troops being killed per day. And then he talks about various positive developments, F-16s, okay? But there were limits to what F-16s might achieve. They had to remain 40 kilometers or more from the front line because Russia will shoot them down. So what are they going to do? The F-16s are not going to change anything. He's already admitting that. talking about superior aviation and strong air defenses. Okay, and so they're using drones, they're using kamikaze drones, they're hurting Russia in the Black Sea, in the Black Sea. This is what we've been hearing for so long. This isn't changing anything. But I just want to fast forward now because this is the kicker, okay, guys? Because it's a lot about, oh, look how great Syrski is. He's so much better than Zaluzhny. He is the general that they've always needed. But here is, could Ukraine win? So you might ask yourself, wow, this article really is not highlighting what the headline said. The headline says Syrski knows that they can win and he knows how, right? So he not only does he feel like they can win, he knows it's going to happen. Could Ukraine win? And if so, how long before victory? I think you would be very brave to say win. We do everything to make it happen. There is simply no more important task for us, leaving the stage, striding back to work. That is not the same as saying that you know how to win the fight. That's basically saying you don't know. Not only do you not know if you're going to win, you're probably not going to win. So that is a situation Ukraine finds itself in. And why did I just review that? Because Putin's warnings to the United States and Germany are a direct byproduct of how this conflict is going. The United States is so thirsty for escalating the Ukraine conflict, getting closer to a war with Russia, because Ukraine is essentially out of any other possibilities. There is no possibility that at the stage of the conflict, at the way that the conflict has developed up until this point, for Ukraine to make any more gains, for Ukraine to recover, for Ukraine to find itself in a position maybe it was in the summer of 2022, right? It's not in those positions anymore. It's no longer going to be making any strides. In fact, all you can hope for is that Russia continues the strategy of attrition despite having all of these advantages, which Ukraine will likely get from Russia. Why? Because Russia does not want to steamroll Ukraine. It does not want to provoke NATO. It does not want to play with the stability that is won. So it is going to use this strategy because it does get to the same point. It's like that metaphor of who wins, the tortoise or the hare, right? Does the rabbit win or does the tortoise win? Well, the rabbit goes as fast as it can, but it's a long race. The rabbit gets tired. The rabbit needs to take a rest. The tortoise just keeps going and wins, right? That's how Russia has been playing this war, to somewhat frustrating effect for a lot of folks who want to see an end to the brutality and the carnage. But nonetheless, this is the position that NATO and the United States, with at its head, has put the world in. And so the fact that the United States is now considering arming Germany in a Cold War era massive escalation of an arms race, a nuclear arms race, because that's what this would generate. It would mean that Russia would not only be fortifying, and that's what it is doing. It is preparing the same to match or surpass the weapons that the United States is going to transfer to Germany, these missiles that it's going to transfer to Germany. And then it's going to consider placing them as strategic points all along not only Russia's territory, but possibly and almost guaranteed the world. Because Russia has already promised this. Russia has already said that it is going to, with the green lighting of US and NATO missiles and other weaponry into Russian territory, that Ukraine is allowed to fire anything it wants deep into Russian territory. Russia's already said it's going to arm adversaries. You better believe that if these medium, long-range missiles are in Germany in 2026, Russia is going to place its systems around the world as well. Russia has a lot of friends. Russia is not an isolated country. Russia has friends all over the world. It has friends all over the world with huge security concerns. Venezuela, on July 28th, will be holding elections for Nicolas Maduro. Venezuela has been literally under threat from violent US-backed guarimbas and proxies for years and years and years. Literal assassination attempts on Nicolas Maduro, hundreds of sanctions on that country. Venezuela needs protection. Who's to say Venezuela doesn't get that help? Look at Ansarallah. There's already rumors. We don't know if it's confirmed or not. But in the Russia-Iran strategic partnership that was just signed this month in July, there's already rumors, or if you might be viewing this later than July. So in July, Russia and Iran signed a strategic partnership. And in that, U.S. intelligence is very worried that it includes stipulations allowing Russia to provide Iran with certain weapons and Iran giving those weapons to Ansarallah, giving it to Yemen. Because that is in line with Russia's policy of now arming the adversaries of the United States. And we saw what the United States did with Israel, or supposedly with Israel, but with the Royal Navy of the United Kingdom. They bombed Yemen's Hodeidah port. They bombed it in response to the drone attack, the successful drone attack that Yemen launched in July 2024. So on Tel Aviv. So this is the world situation developing, and Vladimir Putin is taking charge. This is not a bluff. Russia will do this. Why wouldn't Russia do this? Russia would be foolish not to respond, because those missiles with nuclear capabilities, with the ability to be armed with nuclear weapons, is a direct threat to Russia's very survival. And Russia's nuclear doctrine says that a direct threat to its survival is grounds to go up the nuclear escalation ladder. Now, these long-range missiles may not lead to a nuclear war in and of itself, but they will fast track the path to it. Because if Russia gets whiff, if its intelligence gets whiff that any of these weapons are armed with nuclear capabilities, then all restraint is off the table. Russia will do what it has to do to protect itself. So this declaration made, this agreement made by the US and Germany, it's an act of desperation. We see it all over the world with Israel and Hezbollah, right? Wanting to provoke a war, wanting to drag the United States into a war. Act of desperation. It's not strength. They know that they're cornered. They know they can't win. They know they need maximal international support. So what does Israel do? Well, it tries to set a pretext like it did in the Golan Heights. The United States is doing the same thing. The United States and NATO are doing the same thing by moving up the escalation ladder, sending or promising to send these long-range, medium-range weapons. They think it is to intimidate Russia, but what they're actually doing is they're sowing the seeds for their own destruction. They're sowing the seeds for all of our destruction, because this leads inevitably to nuclear war. That's what this leads up to. This is what the Ukraine conflict was always going to lead up to. This is what the Ukraine conflict was always going to lead up to. It was always going to lead to this path, because the United States and NATO did not want to respect Russia's legitimate security concerns around Ukraine's neutrality, and the fact that the United States, since 2014, had been turning Ukraine into a military outpost of the United States and NATO on Russia's border. And that the United States and NATO have been expanding NATO for the same purpose, to make military outposts. Estonia, Latvia. So now we have Sweden, Finland. They're all now being turned into military outposts surrounding Russia, like a noose of military outposts. And Ukraine is the red line. Why? Well, read a history book. Read about Ukraine's history with Russia. Read about Ukraine's history in the Soviet Union. And you'll know that it's not just about a threat of military escalation, provocation, and war. It's also about the fact that Russians inside of this territory and nation we call Ukraine are under direct threat from such a regime. They had been from 2014 onward from what they call a civil war, but really what was just a massacre, a genocide in and of itself, maybe smaller in scale than the one we are witnessing in Gaza, but a genocide nonetheless. And so that's the red line. But the United States and NATO aren't coming to the table. They keep saying, we have Zelensky talking about peace. We have, Trump talking about, I'm going to end the war in a day when I become president. But there really is no appetite for peace. Because if there was, it would have already happened. You can't trust any of these charlatans. Definitely can't trust Zelensky. He's been the biggest charlatan of them all. He has been directly responsible as one of the most foolish looking puppets of the United States and NATO that we've seen, maybe in the history of its illustrious empire building project. He is directly responsible for all these Ukrainian deaths, and he is directly responsible for him pushing us to this brink. But of course, he is controlled. He's a controlled political figure. So he's not he's only pressing the buttons insofar as the United States and NATO are letting him. And they have let him throughout this period. And now we are seeing the fruits of it. Now we are seeing the United States and NATO consider the unthinkable here. They're doing this all over the world. They're considering the unthinkable against China. They're considering the unthinkable in Ukraine against Russia. They're considering the unthinkable in West Asia. This is what it looks like for the empire to decline, to collapse, to crumble. We're seeing the edifice of the empire just wilt. It is being destroyed from within and from without. The empire is looking all kinds of chaos on the domestic front, unable to resolve or address any contradiction, any problem, any economic malady, political malady, social malady. Forget it. It's unraveling. And then abroad, the United States doesn't have any legitimacy. People look at the United States as it should be looked at, as an agent of war, as the biggest purveyor of war and violence around the world, as an empire whose time should be and is fast becoming up. So Putin's warning is no bluff. We should not take it as that. Russia has been preparing its nuclear forces. It has been conducting tactical nuclear drills with Belarus. It has a lot of nuclear weapons stored in Belarus, ready for both of them to use them if needed. It has all of the military capabilities. It has all the advantages. It will employ them if it has to. But the one thing about Russia that we can say is that it will go about this in a very measured way, in a very rational way. This move, though, by the United States and Germany shows that the same cannot be said about the US, about NATO, and about the rest of the collective West. They are on a suicide mission. They are taking us to the abyss. They are the problem. So if there's any target here, if there's any force, if there's anything that we should be blaming, it's the United States, it's the empire for getting us into this position. And once we know that, then we know where our attention really needs to focus on. It's not just Russia's actions and how they respond to things. It's about how the people respond to these dangers and threats. That's why it's so important to take the wool off of their eyes, off of the people's eyes, and ensure they know that if the abyss is coming, then it's our responsibility to do anything we can to stop it, including stopping this reckless warpath with Russia. All right, everybody. Now we're going to go to the next story, and then if you have any questions, super chats, etc., please do send them along. I will also look an email if there's any PayPal, any Patreon. I see a couple of new Patreon members. Thanks so much. Reminder, this stream is likely going to get demonetized. All right. Now, I don't think that affects super chats, but don't quote me on that. But because of this topic, because of what I just showed you, it's really important that if you support this channel, go to the video description, go to Patreon, become an annual member, go to Substack, become an annual member, go to YouTube, hit join button, become an annual member. That will ensure, okay, that I can continue to do this work despite demonetization, which almost always happens with Palestine-related videos. Okay, so now we're going to get to a China story. All right. We have the United States lecturing China again, but not only is there's a big trip happening as the West Asia is on fire, right? As Gaza, as Hezbollah and Israel go to war, the United States is focusing on the Asia Pacific. This is what is not often talked about. The United States is not, they are not concerned as much, okay, with they don't want to be dragged into a Middle East war, not because they're about peace, but because they're looking at what's next. They're looking at World War III with China. So we always have to remember this whenever we take into any geopolitical development into account, that it's always about the next war. The next war is with China. All right. So Antony Blinken, okay, everyone is in China. Janet Yellen, there's a huge delegation of the U.S. political class in China. We're going to go over what they're doing and what they're saying, right? Because we're going to gradually move into how the United States is using diplomacy for military purposes. I mean, it's sick. It's disgusting. So the United States is bopping around. So the United States right now, or say July 28th, if you do this later, it's later, or it already happened. But the United States is meeting. There's an ASEAN summit in Laos. So the United States bopped to that, and they decided to have, they're meeting with all their so-called allies, and they're also meeting with their Chinese counterparts. So let's get started on this, okay? And yes, so a lot of people talk about YouTube. So YouTube's not only blocking comments, but I believe YouTube has blocked notifications for this stream because of the topic. I'm going to show you later what Facebook did to me. So again, the censorship is crazy right now. This stream, I know there was a lot more interest in this stream before it started. And I noticed that as YouTube gets into high gear promoting, which is usually in the last few hours of a stream, before a stream starts, the 2 hours before, they really push. They weren't pushing. I know this for a fact. I've heard this from viewers. I've seen it in the chats. A lot of people saying, I didn't get a notification. I just had to stumble here. Okay. So just FYI, the censorship is insane right now about this topic, because when there is a real threat of war, the censors are going to be high. So with that said, of course, hit the like button. Do try to boost the stream any way you can, but become a member as well if you are able to, because that's how you get notified as well as get other perks. But that's how you support this channel for real, because at any moment, this could be gone. I've been talking to other people about this. This is just how it is. Okay, so just know that could happen. But let's get started on the China story. All right. So as Ukraine is faltering and quickly losing ground to Russia, as West Asia is on fire with the huge concerns of regional war and potentially global war coming from Israel's rampant desire for a broader war with Lebanon, Hezbollah, and of course the rest of the axis of resistance. The United States is focusing on China, and it's focusing on a war with China, a military conflict, not just an economic conflict, not just a diplomatic row, not some kind of propaganda war, all of the above, but the military conflict is what we are seeing escalate dramatically. So we need to know, Is this war going to happen? And if it's going to happen, how will it transpire? Well, that's what we're going to go over now. So the United States went to the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit in Laos in July of 2024. And at this summit, the United States met with many of its counterparts, especially those it considers to be valuable chips in its build up to war with China. And we're going to get into the fruits of that, the dangerous fruits of that bring us to possibly the precipice of war with China. But first, I want to show you how they spoke to China. There was a lot of lecturing going on to China. So first, we have Antony Blinken looking like the clown that he is, talking about how China needs to be warned that Kamala Harris cares about the rules-based order too, that they're not going to get on over Kamala Harris if she becomes president. Saturday's meeting, so this is back in July, okay, of July 27th, as all of this build up to war with Hezbollah is happening between Israel and Hezbollah. So in a sign of political tumult back home in Washington, Antony Blinken delivered a message on Saturday to his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi that Vice President Harris, not just President Biden, is committed to the rules-based international order. The two chief diplomats met for more than an hour on the sidelines of the foreign ministers meeting of the ASEAN nations, which was being held in the Laotian capital. It was a sixth meeting since resuming relations in June last year after a tense hiatus in which most high-level contacts were put on hold between the two countries. Blinken said that both the president and the vice president believe that stability in the relationship is important and that both also believe it's important to uphold the rules-based international order. His effort to speak on behalf of Harris and not just the president was a sign that the administration is taking steps to convey political continuity to U.S. rivals after the surprise decision for Biden to drop out. So isn't that wonderful? The United States is using hostile rhetoric with China at a foreign ministers meeting between ASEAN nations in order to convey political unity. But not only this, you had Janet Yellen also meeting with her Chinese counterparts and once again claiming overcapacity is the problem. So Secretary of State Janet Yellen said she would press China to address the country's macroeconomic model that has led to overcapacity, claiming it poses a threat to the viability of firms and workers globally. Saying Chinese observers are noting and criticizing Yellen for engaging in a political show to shift the blame for U.S.'s domestic problems to China and win votes for the Democrats. The real purpose behind hyping China's new energy overcapacity is to contain China's advantage in new energy industry, observers said, calling on the U.S. to stop its hegemonic coercion and respect market economic principles and international trade rules. So again, overcapacity. What does that mean? China is doing too much. China is trading too much. China's developing too much. China is supposedly putting a glut on the market and controlling key markets. Well, the United States has placed 100% tariffs on China's electric vehicle industry as sanctions on polysilicon in the Xinjiang region over so-called human rights. The U.S. is doing a lot on this front to try to smear China economically. So that was all happening, a kind of a total economic and diplomatic ploy. But what really ended up being significant, and this is very significant, this is very scary in a lot of ways. The United States is recreating a warfighting command in Japan because of the threat from China. This is The Economist, hastens the biggest military transformation in the Pacific in decades. So this is what, okay, so Japan, of course, an ASEAN member, met with the United States on the sidelines. Foreign minister, we don't have a foreign minister in the United States. We have Antony Blinken. But nonetheless, Japan agreed to allow this. This is what the big issue is in reality. This is a major escalation. So, America's largest air base in the Pacific, the Kadena Air Base, is roughly 650 kilometers from the coast of China. As the missile flies, jets constantly roar over children's playgrounds on their way to and from patrols. But American forces there have, in effect, been on a peacetime footing since the end of the Vietnam War. That changed when Lloyd Austin, America's defense secretary, announced the creation of a new warfighting command to oversee all American forces in Japan. The historic shift, as Austin calls it, is a sign of alarm with which America and Japan regard the threat from China, which is rapidly building up its armed forces. The aim of the headquarters is both to strengthen defense of Japan, once a rear base for operations, but increasingly likely to be on the front line of any conflict with China, and to mirror Japan's plans to create an American-style joint command to fuse air, sea, and other land and other forces early next year. This is finally the transformation of U.S.-Japan relations from what used to be a mainly basing agreement to project U.S. military power into a true military alliance, said the CSIS, Center for Strategic International Studies, a U.S. government think tank based in Washington, D.C., as they say. The move may deepen China's worries about encirclement and intensify complaints that the U.S. is trying to build an Asian NATO. And of course, here we get the apologetics. No, there's no mutual obligation to defend each other. There's none of that from the United States and their so-called allies. It's just an administrative headquarters. They're just going to be liaising with the government. Okay, so this is big because we know that all of that BS, right? All that administrative BS. We know that they're really preparing for war. In any war with China, communications with frontline forces of Japan and elsewhere in the Western Pacific are likely to be heavily disrupted by cyber attacks, sabotage of undersea cables, or conflict in space to neutralize each other's surveillance and communications. So a forward-deployed operational command center, well within range of China's missiles, brings memories of Douglas MacArthur, who fought many battles against Japan in the Philippines and Papua New Guinea, much closer to action than Nimitz, sometimes dangerously so. He later ruled Japan after its surrender. So this is what they're literally admitting. They're literally admitting that they're integrating Japan's military with the United States's. And this is going to be a forward deployed command center, which will give the United States even better capabilities to essentially not just control Japan, but to use the entire Asia Pacific as a battering ram against China, supposedly. Because we have to ask ourselves, can they do it? Can they succeed? NATO, under U.S. leadership, is not succeeding in Ukraine. Certainly nothing we are seeing in West Asia is succeeding militarily, if we think and understand and see that the axis of resistance has absolutely been able to not just build up, but show that it has the capacity to strike back against Israel and the United States. Ansarallah, a little movement has the ability to strike back at the United States, get into Tel Aviv, right? And it hasn't used nowhere near just this one force its full capacity. So can China, with hundreds of billions of dollars of US dollars worth of a military budget, right? Can the United States defeat China in the Pacific? Is this war a realistic option? Well, the New York Times says absolutely not. Here's a New York Times op-ed. Beijing can take the South China Sea without firing a shot. This is around the same time as this agreement. And look, every admission from the United States, okay, every admission from the U.S. media, mainstream media, is always to justify more war spending and to justify further involvement. It's never to not do it. Okay, it's never to not engage in conflict. That's just important to say. Over the past 15 years, China has expanded its military presence in the South China Sea. It has laid claim to nearly all strategic waterway, a vital shipping lifeline of the global economy, rich in energy and fishery resources. China has used non-military assets such as its coast guard, fishing vessels, and maritime militia to bully its neighbors, blockade ships, and build Chinese military bases on disputed islands. America is partly to blame. It's condemned its behavior, but eager to avoid escalation, it's consistently refrained from standing up militarily, which has only emboldened Beijing. A new approach is needed. The U.S. must take real action to strengthen alliances and confront China before it eventually takes control of a huge body of water without firing a shot. Like any unchallenged bully, China has become increasingly aggressive. So they talk about the Philippines encounter, which is a reaction to the U.S. arming the Philippines and allowing them to go to the Renai Jiao beat up boat and send weapons there, and the bases that have been built on the Philippines. But they'll tell you that it was China that was bullying them. And then, of course, there's the disputes between the Philippines and Vietnam. you know, they're hyping up concerns, okay? But the fears, they say, are overblown, okay? Fears of China going into full conflict mode over Taiwan, over the Philippines. This is what this is. I'm summarizing this, okay? Um, they're overblown. Why? This person has studied Chinese military strength. I'm convinced if the U.S. were to take a more assertive stance in the South China Sea, Beijing would likely back down and avoid a war it knows it would lose. So this is what the point of this article is. It's not to say, well, China can just take it without fighting or China. It already is. It's to say that China is just winning right now because the United States is not doing enough. Okay? And so they're going to argue that the South China Sea is more vulnerable, but this assumes that every country, ASEAN countries, Pacific countries, are just going to fall in line with the United States. So we don't even have to read the rest because it is a position of hubris saying that China will lose. China will lose a war with the United States because the United States, if it can galvanize its allies like it just did with Japan, that would mean that China would be the one surrounded and be the one that would have to back down. Well, this is an interesting position coming out of the New York Times because we've already had many war games. Many. I'll just show you one. Center for New American Security. What is it? It is a U.S. State Department backed, U.S. Defense Department backed, military contractor funded think tank. And they've war gamed scenarios. And this is over Taiwan. And why is it so important? Because the United States will never say it is going to wage a war with China in the South China Sea for the South China Sea. Why? Because that would mean it would be projecting a kind of imperial power that it has to accuse China of doing. It has to accuse China of being the aggressive one, of building up its military, even though all evidence is to the contrary. Yes, China has been increasing its military spending. Yes, it has been advancing its military technology and apparatus, but it's been doing that in response to the United States, which has literally increased its military budget by hundreds of billions in the last several decades. Why? Mainly to move toward a conflict with China. Look at any military budget that's been passed in the last several National Defense Authorization Acts, and every single one will say more money, more weapons, more aid in order to fight, in order to build up toward China, in order to confront China, whatever they're saying. But here is the Center for New American Security. This is what they had to say about the gaming lab they did of the war over Taiwan. See, Taiwan is the victim. Taiwan is a small island that they can claim is being oppressed by China and it wants to be independent, but China's not letting them. And China has made all these threats. So China is the big boy here. China is the big boy that's trying to suppress the little boy. And so the U.S. can act like it is David when in fact it is a Goliath that I guess is fast looking like looking a lot smaller than maybe it did in the past. But here we have, okay, what happened. The war game, all right, so we're not going to read the whole thing, but the war game indicated no quick victory for either side if China decides to invade Taiwan. Neither side felt it, although it had lost the fight over Taiwan, and even though, so neither side felt as though it had lost the fight over Taiwan, and even though China hoped to achieve a swift and decisive victory, it was prepared for a long fight. Beijing was faced with a dilemma, whether to keep the war limited in the hope the U.S. did not become involved, or preemptively strike U.S. targets to improve Chinese probability of success, but at a high cost of prolonging the conflict. In such a scenario, neither Beijing nor Washington is likely to have the upper hand for the first week of the conflict, which suggests a protracted conflict. So, consequences far beyond what Beijing and Washington intend if this war were to happen. How quickly the conflict could escalate with both the U.S. and China crossing red lines. A high risk that deterrent signals may be misread in a potential future fight due to differences in military strengths and weaknesses, and these shape the types of escalations Beijing and Washington are to select. Despite declared policy of no first use, China may be willing to brandish nuclear weapons or conduct demonstration of its nuclear capability in an effort to end or prevent U.S. involvement in the conflict. So, the war game also highlighted additional asymmetry, the role of capable U.S. allies and partners could play in a future conflict. Not only does China lack such relationships, this is what they're trying to always promote, right? But capable military partners on the U.S. side add significant combat power, depth, and strategic significance to efforts to defend Taiwan. They, of course, are not including Russia. They're not including the rest of the multipolar world. But nonetheless, we have to understand that even just talking about nuclear deterrence and the fact that this would be a protracted conflict means that the United States doesn't win. That's what it means. It means the United States doesn't win. The United States does not win a conflict if it does not take out China's capabilities immediately because there's a nuclear option. That is an admission that they cannot win. So China is already prepared. The Center for New American Security has said it, that there are differences in capabilities, that the United States would have to fight a particular kind of war. And of course, they're going to hype up the allies because this is what the United States has to rely on. They have to rely on other countries in the region to do its dirty work. But the problem is that if those countries try to do the US's dirty work in a way that steps over China's red line, well, then what stops China from using its geographic and military capabilities to disarm these countries? This is the nightmare scenario that the United States is literally wargaming. This is the nightmare scenario that the New York Times is literally provoking. And this is a nightmare scenario that the United States has literally went forward with to an even greater degree by establishing this command center with Japan. Now, I want to show you. So this is a bad look for the United States. The United States is not going to make it through this. But the United States also has another problem, okay? And that is that China does not have to use the United States' means, does not have to copy the United States in order to win this war. Here is in the South China Morning Post. I found a great article describing how China is already winning this war without firing a shot. The real reason why they have to hype up allies, why the United States has to hype up allies, because it can't, not only can it not do it on its own militarily, but China is already winning economically and geopolitically and economically. So here we have the Belt and Road Initiative is picking up momentum amid increasing synergy with countries in the expanding BRICS grouping. This is how emerging nations are already dethroning the West, and that means China. The United States and certain European countries may emerge from their current state of political brawling to find the world has changed while they were otherwise occupied, and that they are no longer in charge of it. Power is moving southward. One little remarked upon aspect of the shifting balance of global power is the increasing cooperation between BRICS grouping of countries in the China-centered Belt and Road Initiative. Launched in 2013 by President Xi Jinping of China, the initiative is a geo-economic program designed to project influence by peaceful means. China cannot impose infrastructure connectivity on others to further its grand designs unless they are willing to participate. Even other members within BRICS have been reluctant to embrace Belt and Road projects, arguably for fear of alienating key Western powers with which they have close relationships. One of the largest among them, however, in BRICS, Brazil, has plans to join the initiative. As reported, Brazil President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has stated that his administration is putting together a proposal to join. The rapidly expanding family of BRICS nations can economically benefit from taking part in the Belt and Road Initiative in the form of infrastructure networks linking them to the world's second largest economy, measured by gross domestic product. Member nations also benefit from being connected to each other and having alternative sources of financing. Yet against these positive attractions, these countries have been factoring potential disapproval of Western nations that have engaged in a flurry of rival initiatives to the Belt and Road Initiative. But Western countries are now perceived to be in a state of political disarray, in the case of the U.S., a problematic fiscal state. And China is taking advantage of a strengthened position of international authority as geopolitical rivals mired in domestic woes are less likely or able to take any united stand against nations that support the initiative. So, and that is an understatement of the century, because it's not just that. It's the fact that the United States and its Western allies will not. He said that there's a flurry of rival projects, but those rival projects aren't producing anything. They're not producing anything. And this is what he's about to get to. So, Hung Tron, a resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, which is NATO's think tank, says that, quote, many Belt and Road Initiative loans have been concluded using Chinese laws and dispute settlements instead of Western ones, such as British laws traditionally used in bank lending. China is continuing to open up to the outside world, but presumably more on Chinese terms than Western terms, and there lies the problem. That's the big problem here. That's why China is aggressive. That's why China is a threat, not because of its military, whether there's going to be a war. The US is the one preparing for that in a very suicidal way. But it's because China's ability to fund infrastructure projects that enhance its own access to global trade and investment has been increasingly questioned as financial implications of the man projects becomes clear. But however, a number of developments suggest a bolder approach might be taken by the initiative going forward. So here we have it. We have the bank. We have banking capital being factored in. What we are essentially seeing is the United States being completely rejected on the financial arena, and that is leading the United States to become desperate on the military arena. Launched in 2016 amid great expectations it could challenge the World Bank Group, the Beijing-based Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank adopted a fairly low profile. It has only invested 53.8 US billions of dollars in 276 projects, and its assets are well below the World Bank's US's 347 billion at about 61 billion. But the bank has been conservatively managed under Jin Luqin, China's former vice minister of finance. But now, and he has kept the AIIB at arm's length as far as Belt and Road. But high-level financial sources have suggested that Jin's current 5-year term at the AIIB is likely to be extended and that the bank could become more important in funding the initiative, as well as complementing BRICS' $100 billion authorized capital new development bank. So Brazil, right? Brazil's Dilma Rousseff owns that bank essentially. They're the ones who are leading that bank. They don't own it, but they lead it. Dilma Rousseff is who is in charge of the BRICS Bank. And then you have the expansion of Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, the UAE in January. Thailand and Malaysia are interested in joining. Indonesia is interested in joining. Vietnam is interested in joining. Kazakhstan is interested in joining. So on and on and on. So the BRICS is going to expand. Kazan is about to happen in October, the BRICS summit led by Russia this time. And this author is saying that Western nations have to wake up to the reality that their dominance in trade and investment is going away, and that the Belt and Road Initiative, while there isn't any memorandum for BRICS countries to participate in it, and that likely won't ever occur, there's going to be a lot of synergy between the two. So what does this tell us? It tells us that China is not a threat because of some kind of aggression, right? The US is building up toward a suicidal war with China because of developments like this, because China is building a different way of organizing, of doing economics, of organizing the world order. It is building a multipolar world order away from US diktats. That is what is so problematic for the United States. And that's why they're trying to bring together so-called allies. They're trying to move into this sphere of influence in the Asia Pacific. They're trying to dominate. Japan is now once again essentially back to World War II level threats, right? In World War II, after it lost World War II, Japan was completely demilitarized and the US essentially occupied Japan. And that was a power play. It wasn't all benevolence. It wasn't just, oh, US is for democracy. It's for the end of that kind of fascistic rule. No, the US said, wow, this is a great opportunity to expand into the Asia Pacific. Let us occupy Japan. Let us be the bulwark, the force that helps rebuild Japan so that Japan can then serve us. And that is what has been happening for many decades. And now it's come to a crescendo point where the United States is so much in control of Japanese geopolitical of Japan's geopolitical role in the world that it has pushed Japan to not only neglect its a constitutional mandate to not increase its military budget above 1% of its total GDP. Now it has had Japan double its military spending and increase not just its military basing structure, but to establish a command center, which essentially puts Japan even under further control of U.S. policy, of U.S. foreign policy. So this is a major escalation. More is coming. More is coming. This is not an alarm that is meant to sensationalize anything. When the United States does actions like this, it is serious about the overall objective. The US doesn't really have a strategy, of course. It doesn't have a policy that makes much sense from the standpoint of what the reality is on the ground in front of it. But it does have an overall objective, which is different from a strategy. The objective is to destroy China. The objective is to destroy any alternative in its path. And therefore, the United States, you can see from its record, has no shortage of reckless wars that it is engaged in order to meet that objective. Might not have been strategically smart, right? Especially after the Soviet Union fell, it might not have been smart to go full scale ahead in trying to destabilize every part of the world in order to cement hegemony. But that's what the United States did. And even as we see the crumbling edifice everywhere in the world, from Latin America to West Asia to Ukraine, the United States is going to continue to push in the Asia Pacific. And not only will it continue to push, but it will continue to move in the direction of war. And it is creating essentially a geopolitical minefield that the US and China, especially China, has to maneuver around. And the United States so hopes that China steps on one so that this war can ignite. Maybe not everyone in the foreign policy blob, but there are many in the foreign policy blob that want to see this happen. But all evidence shows that this war would not be pretty, that this war would not be winnable, and that it could very well go nuclear. That is the consequence of trying to defeat a power like China, a rising power like China, with the most important economy in the world, with a completely different set of objectives and strategy on development, military, political, and economic, as well as a real peer competitor with nuclear weapons. This is what it means. It means that you, the United States, the so-called hegemon, are actually not in the favorable position that you thought you were. It is game over for the United States if it makes this move. Will it make it? The answer is eventually. And that's why it is our job. It is our duty to stop it. All right, everybody. That is it for the topic. So I'm gonna get to the super chats. Okay. Let me just swig some water. And then I will get to some super chats and we can wrap up here. All right. Here we go. Here we go. So let me just thank once again the moderators in the chat. I don't see any YouTube members in the chat right now. I see Where Pilgrim in the chat as well. So thanks for moderating. Desert Mantis, Quantum Alchemist, once again, thank you so much for taking care of the moderating duties. Here we go. We have Sailor Jerry. Okay. Thanks so much, Sailor Jerry. Concerned citizens, do you think Israel will nuke Lebanon if pushed? Really good question. That's the concern. This is the concern for the axis of resistance. Now, this would be a complete and utter strategic nightmare for Israel if it were pushed to a corner. It had to decide based on its own absolutely unhinged policy of occupation, right? An inability to accept the reality of defeat. Because that's what essentially a war between Israel and the rest of the axis of resistance would mean. It would mean that Israel has to accept the reality of defeat. Because Israel can't win this on the ground. The IDF can't beat the resistance in Gaza. How could it defeat Iran, the Islamic resistance in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah, Ansarallah? How can it defeat these forces? It can't. It can't defeat these forces. Hezbollah alone is powerful enough to destroy the IDF's capabilities. Hezbollah has been doing it. Hezbollah has not only been taking intelligence on its military bases and air bases all around the border region between Lebanon and so-called Israel, but it's also been hitting military installations with frequency, creating a problem that Scott Ritter has talked about, where Israel will have a hard time getting together all of its logistics in time to fight Hezbollah, because Hezbollah can just take out one part of the logistical, um, battle scenario after another. Can just hit one part, destroy the tanks over there, destroy the airfield over there, destroy. It doesn't have to destroy in massive quantities. It just has to do it enough to where Israel cannot mobilize. So that's the situation Israel finds itself in, and that's this nuclear question card is the one that never gets brought up. I never see it in the mainstream press. I never see it even among independent commentators. But again, I'm an analyst, and I also believe it's important to look at not just the strategic, but also the theoretical and the material reality in front of this burgeoning regional war. The material reality is that if Israel cannot defeat it by conventional means, what else does Israel have other than nuclear weapons? It doesn't have a diplomatic front. It doesn't have friends in the region that are really reliable. I mean, sure, the Gulf monarchies, they can surely act in a very traitorous manner. Egypt, too. Surely a lot of these countries are not necessarily friends of Palestine, so to speak, or friends of the axis of resistance. But will they sacrifice people? Will they be able to survive? I don't believe people in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Bahrain. I don't believe in these countries. They want to fight alongside Israel, the people. Definitely not. We saw some of the protests in places like Jordan and other countries, Bahrain. Well, there have been resistance. There's resistance in Bahrain firing, right? Firing at Israel. So we have to be quite honest here that Israel only has the nuclear option left. So would it do it? I can't say. Because while the United States is no, let's say, stranger to nuclear war, it has used nuclear weapons in the past. It has threatened them many times in the past. It's hard to say whether the U.S. at this juncture of its economic, political, and military life, the U.S. empire, would be willing to sacrifice basically the entire region and, of course, the rest of the world and itself for Israel. I don't think it would. But does it have the power to stop Israel? That's questionable. I believe it does. See, the thing is, I believe the United States has the power. If we just talk about who is the hegemon here, it's not Israel. But does the United States, this is the thing about power, is that it only goes so far, right? Politics is much more complex than just puppet master, puppeteer, or puppet and puppet master, right? Oppressed and oppressor. Oftentimes, right, we've seen it throughout history, oppressed people. Look at what the axis of resistance is doing. Look at what a lot of countries around the world, look at the history of China, right, for example. Unspeakable odds. Look at what Palestinians are doing in resistance. Unspeakable odds and in many respects winning. Of course, the Palestinian people have a long way to go. But the Chinese people, they've won a lot for themselves, regardless of whatever you think about their government. They won a lot from their political process, from their ability to take power, to take it out of the hands of the foreign interventionists, of the imperial powers, and of course, their compradors, those who were doing their bidding in parties like the KMT, warlord factions, etc., during the period before World War II and into World War II. So the Chinese people have won a lot. So politics, of course, is a lot more complex in these static categories. But the fact of the matter is that this is also applicable to the puppets and the puppet masters. Because oftentimes we think, well, if the United States, right, is supplying Ukraine, the United States is supplying Israel, then that means the United States has all this leverage. It can use its policy makers, it can use its political class, it can use its intelligence agencies, etc., to exert influence on those countries. And that is true, right? Ukraine can't push a button with the US saying yes or no. And Israel can't do anything without consulting with the United States. But what happens if Israel doesn't listen? That's been the case for this whole, not to say that the United States has been calling for peace between Palestinians and Israel, but certainly the United States has had conversations with Netanyahu, Biden, and maybe not Biden, but his boss has said, well, maybe now is the time for a ceasefire. What has Netanyahu done? No, no. What has the United States said? Well, okay, right? Because in the end, the United States does see Israel under its current arrangement, as it is currently constituted, as in line with its overall geopolitical, economic, military interests in the region, even if that's not always true, right? So again, politics more complex than just whether things are true or not, whether one entity, nation, country has more power than the other. So I just want to conclude this point by saying that even if the United States says, no, Israel, do not use nukes on Hezbollah because that would end everything. If you do that, you are done. We are done. The region's on fire. The world, it's going to destroy the supply chains. Forget about eating, nuclear winter, all of that. Well, who's to say Israel listens? Who's to say? These people who lead the Israeli government, these people who are committing this genocide, these people who support it, they are not to be trusted. So will they do it? I cannot say. But what I will say is that if there is to be a regime that does this, there's only two in the world that I can think of. That's the United States and that is Israel. That's my take. Thank you so much, Rebecca Spiegel. Thank you so much, H. Durkin. JD says, I think in the long run, the Eastern Hemisphere will work itself out while the U.S. tears itself apart. I do too. I do too. And I think this is true because these so-called allies of the United States that they're trying to build in the Pacific, uh, the New York Times is trying to play up their capabilities as a joke. China is not worried about Japan or South Korea militarily. It just isn't, because in all honesty, they're just controlled by the United States. Anything that they have that they do is US projection, not their own. It's not like you're building upon what the US has. So this is a total, and they say China doesn't have any friends. Russia's a pretty big friend, and Russia has the better military, more resource than any of these. Oh, I think, China has friends. And not to mention this whole idea that South Korea, Japan, even the Philippines, all these countries, no matter how much the Philippines is so much bluster from Marcos Jr., this puppet, this worthless, good for nothing, right? Complete and utter just sock puppet of US policy. Well, get up to that point, Philippines. Do it, right? Try it. You can try it. Because if you do, your already tattered and maligned economy, that's a result of decades and decades, if not more than a century, of occupation and plunder from foreign powers, Japan, the United States. That, and then of course you had Spain in there too. But all these imperial and colonial powers that have ruined the Philippines up until this day, whatever the Philippines has right now will be gone in a war, right? And this is what a lot of ASEAN nations understand. A lot of countries in the Asia Pacific, no matter how much they cozy up to the United States, understand that if they cut off their economic lifeline from China, they're toast. South Korea understands it. They've built stronger economic relations even during this time. Japan understands it. They haven't cut back. I mean, they've cut back in some respects, right? In the chip war, they've started to divert some of their chip tech, logistical infrastructure, all of that to the United States, but they won't go so far as to cut off literal bilateral economic relations, and that would happen in a war. That would happen. They're not going to do it. It would be absolute suicide. Thank you, Cognite, for this super sticker. It's very generous. And thank you, Carson, for his generous super sticker. So that is all for the super stickers. Let me see if there's any more here in Patreon. So you can become an annual member on Patreon. Actually, let me check the Rumble community. Thank you so much, everyone on Rumble who are watching. Appreciate all of you. Thank you, everyone on Rockfin who is watching. A slight admission, I have completely lost how to cash out of Rockfin. So my Rockfin tips, for all of you wonderful people who've given Rockfin tips, I have not cashed them out in literally months, if not over a year. That is not, I am just not a blockchain guy. I've not figured out the old crypto thing, but I will. It's not going to go away, but I will. And then lastly, let's see, any Patreon. So I want to thank Penny Sunjay for during the stream subscribing. Okay, your subscriptions to Patreon help me keep this going, especially if this is demonetized. But I think that's it. I think that's it for the questions. All right. We have another super sticker that came in, I believe, just now from Chris. Thank you so much. So is there someone else anyway watching? Yeah, you can email me if you want to help. It's like Coinbase or something, and I have to convert it. It's just a headache. But if anyone wants to help, my email is on my YouTube channel. So with that said, everybody, I think I am going to leave. Before I leave here, though, okay, a couple of things. I'm going to do some announcements, actually. So I won't be back on streaming until Wednesday afternoon. I will have economist Michael Hudson on with Jill Stein of the Green Party. All right. So Jill Stein and Michael Hudson will join. We are going to do something kind of fun, right? We're going to talk about world affairs and world developments as we do on this channel. We're going to talk about what makes Jill Stein different through the lens of how Michael Hudson interprets what is going on from a geo-economic perspective. At least that's how I plan on doing it. So it'll be me, where we're getting insights from Michael, and we're going to have Jill Stein talk about why, what position she takes and, what makes her unique in that sense. I've had Jill Stein on in the past, and now there's an election. So I'm going to be giving some airtime to candidates that are actually for peace on this channel. All right. So Michael Hudson, he endorsed her campaign. He will be on the show too. So Jill Stein, Michael Hudson, 1 p.m. Eastern time, Wednesday, the 31st of July. And then Friday, August 2nd, I'm going to confirm this. So I don't want to get you too excited yet because we have to work out time differences. I want to just make sure everything is all good. But Hradi Francis, I'm probably saying this wrong. I cannot speak Arabic, but Hradi Francis is a wonderful journalist out of Lebanon who is very knowledgeable about the resistance, not just in Lebanon, but regionally. And she will be on likely same time, Friday, August 2nd, to talk about West Asia in much better depth from just experience, knowing not just the people of Lebanon, but the rest of the region. So you don't want to miss that. Okay. You do not want to miss that. So those are the next two streams. And then, I'm going to be working into the next week. I know I have VJ Prashad on August 9th. I know I have Mark Sloboda for the 16th. I'm going to probably have Scott Ritter on one more time. And then this guy is off to China at the end of August for a couple of weeks. I will be doing a lot of interesting interviews there. I will be going to a lot of very interesting places. So do stay tuned and do support this channel at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. Okay. Patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. Go there, sign up annually, or go to Substack, go to PayPal, YouTube, membership, all of that. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to head out of here. Take care. And I will see you all again Wednesday. Save that date, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Bye-bye.